Hello and welcome to our AAAL 2021 conference presentation. My name is Angelica Galante. I am an assistant professor in second language education at McGill University, and I'm here on behalf of my co-author, John Dela Cruz, a PhD student at McGill University. Our presentation is titled Factors Contributing to Plurilingual and Pluricultural Competence and Identity, a Mixed Method Study. Before we get started, we'd like to recognize that McGill University is situated on the traditional territory of the Gahaga. So although Montreal is the name that we use today, it's actually land of the Gahaga. To give you an overview of our presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the problem between plurilingualism in monolingual policies and bilingual policies that we have here in Canada, the multilingual turn on research in applied linguistics, the link between language and identity, and we're going to delve into our research questions, the methods, results, and discussion. So to get started, Canada has official English and French bilingual language policies, but other forms of bilingualism or plurilingualism are usually unrecognized. We have seen an increase in multilingualism in Canada. So for example, the number of speakers of an immigrant language has increased 13% in the past few years. In Quebec, the only province in Canada where we have French language policies, is a province where there are a lot of linguistic tensions. We know that Montreal, where we are located, is the largest city in Quebec, and Montreal, although is located in a French speaking province, has over 150 languages, so it's very multilingual and very multicultural. In 2016, 59% of the population in Montreal were considered having been born outside of Canada or at least had immigrant parents. Montreal is also considered the city in North America with the highest percentage of trilingual residents. So just to give you an overview, our positionality here, John Dela Cruz and myself, we both have an immigrant background. John comes from the Philippines and I come from Brazil. Combined, we speak 7 languages, and the languages are listed here. And English and French, although we have these languages, the official languages of Canada in our repertoire, they are not our native languages. So we are speakers of these 2 languages as additional languages. This is important because the kind of population we are going to be working with in this study is very similar to us, in fact. Here's an example of one participant that we had in our study. So here's a participant who has all of these languages, not only languages, but also varieties of Arabic, for example, Arabic varieties. All of these languages, of course, are not, they do not have the same proficiency level, but it's clear that a person with this linguistic repertoire would be considered a plurilingual speaker. However, the linguistic repertoire is usually reduced to 1. A French language speaker, because that's where the policy comes into play. So that's one of the main problems that we have identified here. Now, we have seen a plurilingual turn or multilingual turn in research in applied linguistics, and we have seen the Plurilingual and Pluricultural Competence, or PPC for short here, is an important competence in super diverse contexts where we are located. So for example, people use different languages flexibly, including languages is the cultural background. Here we have a lot of people who come from different cultural backgrounds, so it's very important to know how to communicate with people who have different ideas, different values, and different beliefs. And similar beliefs as well. Here we are not talking about differences only, but being able to be flexible to communicate in different communities. We have seen consistently that language shapes identity construction, and this has been very well documented in the literature. And the reason why people identify as monolingual, bilingual, and plurilingual is something that we're still studying. What we have noticed is that in research, individuals who are proficient in their second language, for example, are more likely to identify as bilinguals. What we still don't know is that no studies have investigated plurilingual and pluricultural identity. We know a little bit about bilingual identity, so we would like to know about what it is that makes a person identify as plurilingual and pluricultural, and the factors that contribute to plurilingual and pluricultural competence as well, which is the ability to flexibly use the languages in their repertoire. So the research questions for our study were, what are the reasons why individuals identify or do not identify as plurilingual and pluricultural, and what are the factors that contribute to higher or lower levels of plurilingual and pluricultural competence? So the study was done here in Montreal. It was done in an English-speaking university in classrooms. We went to classroom to collect data, but we also invited people to come to our research lab. In total, 250 participants from different programs in applied linguistics, political science, etc., participated in the study. Something interesting here is that every time we would go to classrooms to invite people to participate in our study, we had a criteria here. Of course, they had to be 18 years old or plus, but they had to speak a minimum of 2 languages in their repertoire. It doesn't matter what language, but one language had to be the official language in Canada just because of the research instruments. And we would actually think that some people would not be able to participate because they wouldn't feel comfortable, speaking 2 or more languages. But 100% of the people would stay and participate because everybody would fit the criteria. Just to give you an idea about the kind of population we were dealing with. We used 3 instruments to collect data: a demographic questionnaire, a plurilingual pluricultural identity questionnaire, and the plurilingual pluricultural competence scale. A demographic questionnaire gathered information such as first language, second language, but also how participants identify themselves in terms of race and ethnicity. And the PPC scale gathered information about how people use their languages on a daily basis. So the PPC scale is a 22-item scale on a 4-point Likert scale where participants had to agree or disagree with these items. And just to give you an example of the items, one would be, when talking to someone who knows the same languages as I do, I feel comfortable switching between one language to another language. So if they agree, they would go to number 4, which is the last point in the scale. The PPIQ, which is the Plurilingual Pluricultural Identity Questionnaire, included 2 questions, one about plurilingual identity and pluricultural identity. So we provided a definition to participants, such as a plurilingual person is someone who knows 2 or more languages, but does not necessarily speak them at the same proficiency level. So this also included variations in the language. So if people felt that they had this knowledge, they would identify as a plurilingual person or not. And then they would provide reasons why they identified as a plurilingual person or not. The same for pluricultural identity. A pluricultural person is someone who knows about 2 or more cultures, but does not necessarily have this background. So it's somebody who knows the differences and similarities as well, even within the same culture. To analyze the data, so for the first research question, we got information from a demographic questionnaire and the identity questionnaire, and we conducted an inductive analysis with a content analysis on en vivo. We had 2 coders, myself and John. So coder 1, myself, I analyzed the data first, and then I gave it to John to check the analysis. So we conducted an intercoder reliability, and at the first level it was 92%, which was already pretty high. But then we continued taking a look at the data until consensus was reached. For the second research question, we got information from a demographic questionnaire again and PPC scale. Here we conducted a deductive analysis on SPSS. First we conducted a one-way ANOVA, then a post-hoc 2-key HST test, Pearson correlations, and multiple linear regression. Let's take a look at the results. So our sample had 92.9% of people who identified as plurilingual and 88.2% who identified as having a pluricultural identity. So there is a little bit of a discrepancy here, and hopefully by the end of this presentation you're going to see why. Our sample had 34 different languages. You can see the most reported L1s here. English and Chinese were actually tied at 24%. French, Arabic, Spanish, Greek, Persian, Italian, and there were more languages too. 100% of our sample identified as trilingual. 38% were born in Canada, 25% were born in China, and 35% were born in 39 other countries. So taking a look at the statistics from Montreal and our sample, it seems to be very well aligned. Our participants were between 18 years old to 71. The mean age was 24.5. 37% identified as white, 30% as Asian. We had some Middle Eastern, mixed ethnicities, Latinx, and Black participants as well. Now, let's take a look at the reasons. Something that it was not surprising was the first reason was that people identify as plurilingual or pluricultural was the number of languages they have in their repertoire. So here we just provided a graph to see how many occurrences there was in the data when we were analyzing them on in vivo. 159 occurrences of rich linguistic repertoire were part of it, followed by ample lived experiences. Our participants had a lot of experiences, not only with languages and cultures, but also moving from one place to another with immigration, etc. Awareness of differences and similarities between languages and cultures was the next one, followed by transculturalism. And this means people navigating from one particular community to the next and using languages depending on the cultural background of the participants in that community. Adaptation and integration to the new environment. Translanguaging was another one. And finally, openness to linguistic and cultural diversity. So one of the quotes here, I truly believe we are all plurilingual because we all know or have some sort of knowledge of other languages and variations of the same languages. So something that is important is that the participants were acknowledging variations even in the same languages as part of their identity. Another person said, I speak fluent Arabic because I am Moroccan. I speak fluent French because it's the second language in my home country. I also speak fluent Spanish because I did all my scholarship in a Spanish school back in Morocco. Also, I speak English and I'm trying to improve my skills. So this just gives you an idea about the kind of languages that the person has developed over time because of the experiences that they have had. Another one, this is a participant who lives in Montreal and was born here. She says, I was born in Montreal, Quebec, as a child of immigrants from Greece. Aside from attending Greek school, I studied English and Greek during elementary school, English and French during high school, and pursued a bilingual diploma in college and studied English and Spanish in university. So here, the person is really talking about how the educational background helped shape her identity and moving from one language to another. Then she says, my educational crisscrossing is prevalent among trilinguals growing up in Montreal. Being plurilingual is who I am, and I cannot imagine living or working only using one language. Other people talked a little bit about their cultures as well. So this person talked about how language is connected to her cultural background. I feel a different person when speaking different languages. For instance, I am more of a shy person when I speak Arabic, but I feel empowered when I speak English. Also, being exposed to different languages, I feel I can easily understand the cultures of the people speaking them. In my home, my family and I translanguage all the time, and we created what I like to call a hybrid culture. Food was something very interesting that came up quite a bit, especially among Chinese participants. So here we have a quote, sometimes I need to behave differently in different circumstances. For example, when hanging out with Chinese friends and have dinner, we tend to share food all together. But with friends from like the US, I would order food for myself and tend not to share food with them. So here, of course, while the participants talking about food, they're also talking about, depending on the cultural background of the person who they are dining with, they may have different behaviors. Now, something interesting that we found was that participants who identified as bilingual and not plurilingual, even if they spoke more than two languages, were all born in Quebec. What does that mean? We're still going to be investigating this a little bit further, but it could be because of the bilingual discourse that we have here in Canada. We also found that 4 white Canadians were reluctant to claim a pluricultural identity because they feared cultural appropriation. That's an interesting result and worth investigating a little bit further. So here is a quote: "I only adopt my culture. I am a bilingual Canadian. I know about Japanese culture, but as I am not of Japanese descent, I think it would be inappropriate to claim it as part of my culture." Now let's take a look at demographic factors that contribute to PPC levels. So remember that the scale was a 4-point Likert scale. We analyzed the data and we determined that a 2.5 plus indicated some level of PPC on the higher level of the scale. Now PPC scores here range from 1.55 to 4, and the mean was 3.38, which is very high. So we investigated the relationship between PPC and country of origin, and here is what we found. So first, because our sample had more people from Canada and China, we had to separate the data into people born in Canada, China, and everywhere else. And we found that participants born in Canada had significantly higher PPC scores, and participants born in China had significantly lower PPC scores compared to the 3 groups, right? So if you take a look at the mean here, so people who were born in Canada had a 3.52, people who were born in China had a 3.12, and people born elsewhere had 3.40. So there was a relationship here between the longer residence in Canada and PPC scores, indicating that the more participants lived in Canada, the more likely it was that their PPC was higher as well. Now, PPC and number of languages. Number of languages ranged from 3 to 8, as we had seen, and there was a significant positive correlation between the number of languages and PPC scores, indicating that the higher number of languages reported was related to higher PPC scores. PPC and age, a similar result as well. So there was a significant positive correlation between age and PPC scores, which is not surprising because, the more we live, the more experiences we can have with languages and cultures as well. Now, to conclude, we have seen that in this particular sample, we had complex identities. Most of a vast majority of our participants identified as plurilingual and not bilingual, which is something interesting. But at the same time does not agree with the language policies that we have, not only in Canada, but also in Quebec. It's very likely that this phenomenon is happening in other super diverse contexts, so it's something that is worth investigating a little bit further. We also found that languages and cultures are linked, and something that we would suggest for future research is to have the plurilingual identity and pluricultural identity questionnaire combined into one, because that's something that participants were not able to identify much, the difference, except for white Canadians who were afraid of saying that they had a pluricultural identity in fear of cultural appropriation. And we also have noticed that monolingual bilingual discourses can pose barriers to the development of plurilingual identity. Now, some final recommendations here. Dominant discourses of monolingualism in Quebec and bilingualism in Canada may restrict residents' use of non-official languages in public because they may fear, linguistic or cultural discrimination if they're using other languages. We found that Canada's official languages are thriving, so English and French are doing very well, at least in this sample, but minority languages need further recognition, especially for PPC, to continue to be developed. And we also found that language and educational policies in super diverse contexts remain monolingual or bilingual, in the case here of Canada, and they urgently need to recognize current multilingual and multicultural realities. The results of our study are going to be published at the Journal of Multilingual and Multicultural Development with the title Plurilingual and Pluricultural as the New Norm, an examination of language use and identity in the multilingual city of Montreal. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Muito obrigada. Grazie. And I hope to see you soon.